The Final Fantasy XVI previews are out, and they are overwhelmingly positive. Many journalists saying that this could be one of the best Final Fantasy games in the franchise, something that I have been screaming from the mountaintops since this game was first announced. But from all the overwhelming information that we're getting, it's quite clear. Final Fantasy XVI absolutely does not disappoint. And coming off of a few divisive Final Fantasy games such as Final Fantasy XIII and XV, it is good to feel that this is a game that could potentially knock it out of the park and get mainline Final Fantasy back on track. But whether you are a Final Fantasy XVI believer or hater, you need to hit that subscribe button for all things Final Fantasy, because today we have some really interesting interviews from Naoki Yoshida. For starters, the world design in Final Fantasy XVI is one of the most insane that we've ever seen from the FF series, and this quote from the PlayStation blog really highlights just how much effort is being put into Final Fantasy XVI's world, with them saying, quote, "There's one particular Final Fantasy XVI development story that Naoki Yoshida admits he's unlikely to ever forget. The producer describes a particular port city the studio conceptualized. It's a key feature, a colossal stretch of huge wall that runs the length of the city, separating it from the surrounding ocean, and which has successfully protected those behind it from invasion for over 3 centuries. It's a visually impressive sight, one that fits perfectly with the larger world of Valistia. There was, however, one issue. You look over these designs," explains Yoshida-san, "and in the far right corner of the town, on the seaside, there's a natural cliff, and this cliff is maybe 15 meters high, and the leader of the city, the most important person, is housed right there beside it. What stopped pirates from just coming up and destroying the house and taking over? It made no sense. The result was a proverbial and literal return to the drawing board to correct the oversight. They literally spent time reworking this one area because they realized it didn't fully match up with the lore, and because they want this world to feel believable, they actually spent the money and time to fix that one element. And there are plenty of elements like this in the game, where Yoshida talks about how a wall in one city has plenty of holes in it, as a result of many people trying to invade it over the years, with him saying, quote, "It's not been invaded, not fallen, but certainly over 300 years people have tried, and so you wouldn't have a nice, clean, unbroken wall after 3 centuries. You'd have places that are cracked and maybe crumbled, but the wall has held, and just by having that visually, it tells that story, that yes, it hasn't fallen, but people have tried. And so making the history and the lore that we've built is making its way to the design team. It's very difficult, but that makes the game better." Now, as exciting as Final Fantasy XVI is, Final Fantasy XV was a rather controversial game, an incredibly divisive one, I should say, and YoshiP has been clear that the part of that divisiveness that he wants to address the most is the story, with him saying, quote, "While we're moving to action, and we put a lot of effort into creating action, it's got to be the story. Final Fantasy is about the story. We put our main focus, even more than action, on that story. And when you look back at previous games, at FF15, they had their story, but it wasn't complete. And then they try to make it complete, and then they promise some more story, and then they don't give us the story. And you had a lot of people that went into the series wanting us to give them a great story, and they didn't get that. And a lot of people were disappointed in that. Like, even if they liked the game, they're left wanting because one of the main pillars of the Final Fantasy series, stories, was not given to them. And so we wanted to make sure that we had our first and foremost focus on the story, and we think that this is going to set us apart from those other games out there. Now, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people doing some incredibly bad faith reads on everything YoshiP just said here. However, I do think that he is authentically speaking for the fans. Many of you were here back in the day when I witnessed Dawn of the Future being cancelled, and I was absolutely heartbroken. Yes, Dawn of the Future should not have been a novel, but it also was something that just shouldn't have existed. Final Fantasy XV should have been a complete story from day one, not required multiple DLCs, a movie, an anime, and multiple other things in order for it to feel like a complete story. They kept having to fill the holes in Final Fantasy XV, but it's hard to feel like those holes just shouldn't have been there to begin with. Now, in fairness to Final Fantasy XV's team, yes, they had an incredibly rough development cycle, one that I don't wish on anybody. However, to the perspective of the customer, all they see is that they didn't get the story that they wanted, nor did they get the DLCs that were made to fix things up. And while yes, that team did have a tough development cycle as I just mentioned, who was the one that put them in that tough development cycle to begin with? It was the higher ups at Square Enix making poor decisions. What YoshiP's statement does here is take accountability as a higher up himself, and admit in an objective sense that yes, there is still plenty to like about FF15, and no, you're not wrong to like it if you do. But the criticism that the game was not complete at release is entirely fair, and arguably it still wasn't complete even after all of the DLCs. And then after the DLCs promised to bring the story to another epic finale, the higher ups at Square decided to cancel the DLC in order for the team to focus on Forspoken. Personally, it makes me more excited that he is recognizing that, and that Final Fantasy XV's first and foremost endeavor is something I've been preaching for a while. The story of this game needs to knock it out of the park. I think if there is anything that is core to the identity of Final Fantasy, it's not turn-based battles, it's telling an incredible story with a wonderful cast of characters. And if they can do that, then to me, Final Fantasy XVI is every bit a Final Fantasy game. And I have a feeling it's gonna be a really good one. Shout out to patron Vincent Highwind and the rest of the Ultima community.